Coming up on Help Before You Sell.
All I do in those conversations is ask questions. When you ask questions of someone, you get them to think about things in a different way, and that is going to be helpful.
You don't need a subscription, you don't need any fancy tech, and it's just having one-to-one conversations with people.
There's a reason that the spot the difference exercise persists across time. We are machines made to build patterns. Sometimes those patterns are for ill, but we make them.
For business that is above the survival threshold and is actually profitable, I would suggest that finding a way to help as many people as possible, taking the least amount of energy from yourself, I would say is the most important thing that you should focus on in your business. Does marketing and content creation ever feel hard and time-consuming? What if it didn't have to be that way?
Join Rob Drummond,
Matthew Bliss,
and me, Pete Daly-Dixon, your ideal companions on the journey to a value-first approach to business growth, here on Help Before You Sell.
So we've been talking for a few episodes on Help Before You Sell about lofty ideas such as introspection and storytelling, and we thought we'd get down in the weeds for a few episodes and look at the specific tactics, the specific options that you have for helping your potential clients before you sell. So we thought today we'd start off with one that literally anyone can do. You don't need a subscription, you don't need any fancy tech, and it's just having one-to-one conversations with people. So, gents, Pete, you're the resident one-to-one meeting expert. I wondered actually if you could talk a little bit about your journey through that medium, because I think, to my experience, you've been doing these calls for quite a long time.
Yeah, I have, and I guess the interesting thing for me is that, and from an introspection point of view, the space that we have to talk this issue out might actually help me in these calls. Is I have been thinking of them as sales calls, not as helping calls. So to hear you ask the question, let's talk about one-to-one, is my experience of one-to-one calls with people, apart from recording podcast episodes, which is a different issue, is my experience of one-to-one calls with potential clients is that they're sales calls and you're aiming for the sale. But I guess, again, given the space here to reflect, I am helping because all I do in those conversations is ask questions.
You've been calling them curiosity calls, which I think is a really good name for it.
Those are interesting. Those are like discovery calls. They're called discovery calls, curiosity calls, chemistry calls, whatever you call them. I'm actually thinking more about the discovery calls, which I'm doing on behalf of a coach who's got a program which he's selling to a particularly defined niche audience. But just to your point, they probably are helping because all I do in those conversations is ask questions. And when you ask questions of someone, you get them to think about things in a different way, and that is going to be helpful to them. But there's one thing that I just shared before we hit record. I shared my diary for Monday with you guys, and both of you went,
it's already given me hives.
And you have to do them. So just for the sake of the listener, my Monday, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 discovery / sales calls and 1 catch-up call with a friend. So that's 8 calls. I used to, when I had a day like that before, I used to think that I could do other stuff as well. But now I know that actually nothing else is going to happen on Monday apart from those calls. And again, from experience, maybe one of them might result in a sale at some point in time. Basically to say that it seems hugely, what's the word? Help me out, guys. Inefficient use of my time. Yeah. I enjoy speaking to people. Obviously, I've got a podcast. If I didn't, then I wouldn't have that. But in terms of being engaged with something where the end result is a financial transaction of some description to make a sale, to move the business forward, it just doesn't seem particularly efficient to me, and it's immensely tiring. I mean, I finished a 2-hour podcast conversation at 11, and it took me about an hour and a half to kind of a bit of breakfast, just get calmed down, ready to come on this podcast episode with you guys.
And it's not just being on the podcast and talking, it's being mentally tuned in and having your energy right, because if you're presumably on these calls, if your energy is wrong, you're not going to get the outcome that is possible. I was going to say the outcome that you want, but it's not the outcome that you want. It's just figuring out what the right outcome is. But if your energy is wrong, it's not going to proceed.
Yeah, and you have to be fully present and engaged. And if you ask a question, you have to be ready to be there to hear the response and engage. And that takes, like you say, Rob, it takes energy.
I feel like I'm at risk of making myself sound like a hermit, where I never want to have one-to-one calls. I would much rather write 8 emails a day than speak to 8 people a day. But actually, when a lead does come through and they've read my book, they've listened to at least a handful of podcast episodes, like that's a really nice conversation. Like I would quite like more of those conversations. But every time, I think what tends to happen is if you're a service provider and you go out and you try to make it rain and book more sales calls, you end up with more calls that are tiring that don't go anywhere.
And also, experience will show that maybe 3 of those calls will be a no-show. But that again is inefficient, because if they weren't in my calendar to start with, then I could have like an hour and a half block where I know I could do some meaningful work. Because you get on a call, you wait 10 minutes for them to come. You try and phone them or text them. Like, that's it. The call's done. Now, what can you realistically do in 20 minutes, half an hour before the next thing's going to come? So it's like just so wasted time and energy as well. On the flip side, though, I think it also depends what stage you are at in your business. If you're just starting out, then you should fill, from my perspective, you should fill your calendar with as many one-to-one calls with potential clients as you possibly can, and have conversations with them to find out what it is that you really should be doing, what you should be selling, and who you should be helping. That use of the one-to-one call, I think, is immensely useful and important and necessary at particular stages. Would you guys agree?
And pay a bit more for a Zoom account or Riverside account or something that's going to give you the transcript of that conversation, so you can actually see, well, what words do they actually use to describe the problem? Because that might actually be different to the words that you use as well.
Yeah, which then you can use to bring into your emails and your LinkedIn posts and your podcast and whatever. Yeah,
I was just going to make an equivalency to kind of support it, because I think a lot of people go through this process when they think about starting a business. Someone, your Daniel Priestleys will come out and say, you have to get in there, you have to DM people and find out what they want and get those one-to-one relationships going. And other people say, do it at scale, put out a Facebook ad with an automated chatbot that can engage thousands of people in the same minute. What I think about is how the pandemic changed my IT support and training role, in the sense that it became all digital in the context that we're talking about. Like, you set up a Zoom call, you wait for someone to turn up, and it's one person that you're giving that value to. For me, it was a massive change, because I was feet on the ground sometimes across an entire state of Australia, talking to people and helping them with their IT issues. But also, it put me in proximity with other people. So it was more efficient for me to be present in a desk group of like 10 people, where I help one person and they go, oh, cool, I didn't know how to fix that. I've got this thing too. Can you help me with that? Whereas as soon as the pandemic rolled around and we went all remote and digital, like most people are when they're setting up these one-to-one conversations, you can only help one person at a time. And that's if they turn up. And the same with classroom environments and all that kind of thing as well. So the experience that you've just described there, Pete, it's not just a theoretical one. It applies across a number of other disciplines. And if we're talking about helping before you sell, my job at the time was only to help. That was my salaried job. And I got, like, my salary wasn't dependent on the number of people I helped. And yet, sometimes digital and remote makes that a little bit harder.
Yeah. And I guess if we're working from the supposition, the hypothesis or whatever, that the more people you help, the more you will sell, then you can't stay in one-to-one because, well, you can, but you're limiting your sales potential. You've got to find a way to help at scale. I don't know if that's the right word, but you've got to, if you have any desire for a business that is like above the survival threshold, and is actually profitable and giving you the lifestyle that you deserve, I would suggest that finding a way to help as many people as possible with taking the least amount of energy from yourself, I would say is probably the most important thing that you should focus on in your business once you get over that kind of initial start.
Maybe you use the one-to-one calls both as a bottom of funnel mechanism to get high value prospects over the line.
Yeah, once they've consumed all the other stuff.
Yeah. Once they've so they're not jumping on a call straight away. They're not browsing to your LinkedIn profile and clicking the book an appointment link because you don't want to speak to those people yet. It's they're in the help before you sell fan club, and they're just kind of asking a few questions. Like that's fine. But then I think it's also fine to maybe put a very real constraint on how much of this that you do. So there's real scarcity about it. Like you do 4 free calls per week, and people can book one of those free calls, and once they're gone, they're gone. But you doing that also informs then how you might determine the strategy for scale, because you're having real conversations and getting live feedback on hearing what they ask you and how they phrase it. And those conversations are going to sink into your subconscious so that when you then go to write your ads or your emails or whatever, then that's going to come forward and you're going to have a better feel for what's going to resonate.
Would you say that there's an element of what you just talked about there, Rob, with the evolution of the Not a Straight Line podcast, where now guests can pay to have the conversation experience sooner rather than later? And that's a direct result of the 50 plus conversations that I've had and the feedback that I've had from my guests and the value that they get from it. That now there is now a tangible value, which there's a monetary amount put on that. Is that what an aspect of what you're talking about?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess that's almost like a value add in that they can fast track the call, or they can have it as a private conversation that doesn't go on the podcast feed, or they can convert that conversation into a homepage video. There's various add-ons that they can add on. Whereas I was thinking more in terms of limiting the amount of you that is available in the one-to-one situation. If indeed you are doing your own one-to-one calls, because I imagine someone like Daniel Priestley is not jumping on his own. If you book a call with Daniel, it's going to be not Daniel that shows up on the call, and that's fine. He's got a team.
Well, I think what I wanted to say there actually ties very directly to that example with Daniel Priestley. Actually, how you got to where you're at, Pete. I think not what you offer now, but how you got there. Podcasts are a great way to capture what would essentially be one half of that one-to-one conversation that they can, be a voyeur to. And the more episodes you release, the more content there is there for them to get a feel for what your half of that call would be like. As you say, Daniel Priestley isn't going to jump on a call for coaching by Daniel Priestley, but he is going to roll up for an emergency podcast episode with Stephen Bartlett on Diary of a CEO about the state of the world. Podcasts, they I think are a really great way to build towards that scale that you're talking about, Pete. And they are, of course, an essential part of our recommended help before you sell funnel. I think the journey that you got there, that's the important bit that led you to then the add-ons and the offer that you can do at scale now. Putting value in those one-to-ones before they even get there.
I used to invite people onto my podcasts as a kind of one-to-one conversation. Although maybe they weren't really sales calls, that was more getting to know someone better whose ideas I think were simpatico with what I was doing with the podcast. So perhaps it's a slightly different use case, but it is one way of using a podcast to kind of build a deeper network of connections, I guess.
I think it's a brilliant strategy for a podcaster too. Like I've pitched some and had clients who have done this unbeknownst to me. But if you want your episodes to interview either past clients or potential future clients to warm them up to get ready for your leads, and you also get a podcast episode, that's an amazing way to shimmy that one-to-one call into an avenue you can use for other things.
So to play your role piece on these calls, what are the specific things that somebody needs to think about if they are going to implement a one-to-one sales call approach? Do they need any tech, for instance, scheduling tools and so on?
Well, the first thing I would suggest you do is listen to the episode of Not a Straight Line that was released on Christmas Day last year with Alistair McKenzie, because in that episode, you will learn more than you will ever need to know about discovery calls, because we basically did one. I role-played one with Alistair in that episode.
Me and Matt are both nodding along here. So
Yeah.
Yes, you should go and listen to that.
There's a friend of mine in my network who is a sales consultant. He helps businesses with their sales and their sales process. And he messaged me on LinkedIn and he said, man, Alistair should have charged you thousands for that call. So if you want to tap into some free consulting from an absolute just guru, whatever in sales, then do yourself a favor and listen to that episode. So that's the kind of mechanics of running the actual call. I just use Google Meet because it's free and it's easy and you can record it, and that's it. I mean, I just show up, but the you'll get a bit of the mindset from listening to that episode with Alistair. But for me, it's coming from the perspective of being innately curious. If you have there's something I learned from my sales training in Sandler, is if you come with a curious and skeptical mindset and attitude into what is effectively a sales conversation, then you can't go wrong. And what I mean by curious, most people get, but skeptical is that when somebody says something, don't take it at face value, dig into what they say. Oh, I'm curious. So when you said that, what do you actually mean? Because generally what people tell you, like at the surface level, is not what really is going on. And that applies both just at that initial discovery call level as it does further down. So be curious, be skeptical, and don't overcomplicate it.
I've heard Perry Marshall call it, get to the truth, not the sale.
Yeah.
That's the outcome you're trying to get to. And if the truth is that there is no sale, it's not the right fit, then that's also a good outcome, and you should pat yourself on the back for getting to that point.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you're not there to close everybody. I mean, you're not there to close anyone really on a discovery call. The discovery call is to find out whether there is a fit, whether there's a reason to carry on talking. And I think that's the other part of the mindset as well, is come at it from the perspective of, and this really necessitates having an attitude and a mindset of abundance, and there's far more out there than I can possibly cope with, as opposed to, oh my God, I've got to close this client because, I can't afford to eat or whatever. It's coming at it from the point of view of, like, the opposite of innocent until proven guilty, is that they're not a fit until they can prove that they are. And your questions and your curiosity and your skepticism is around trying to get them to disprove that they aren't a fit. If you'll excuse the double I hate double negatives, so I should never use them. But does that make sense? Can you perhaps paraphrase that for me, for the listener?
Yeah, I was thinking as well that if you're getting on lots of these calls and you're speaking to people who are a million miles away in terms of their current level of understanding, then there's really a failure of marketing going on. Like there are holes in your marketing process higher up the funnel. Let's say there are things that are missing, I think. And yes, you should still have the one-to-one conversations, but not maybe so early on. And also perhaps just take like an objective look at your numbers. Like how many calls did you have? How many of those calls felt right? How many ultimately progressed to business? And not just any business, but like really great business that feels good for you and for them and provides a transformational outcome.
And I know, I mean, I'm thinking about the sales calls, discovery calls I'm doing for Stuart, and I know immediately, as soon as I start talking to someone, whether they're gonna go. And the ones that do, they go to the call 2, which is the presentation to Stuart, and it gets to the end of it, and they go, right, how can I pay? You know, where do I start? And I get that sense right at the very beginning. That's, I guess, speaking to the fact that the more you do something, the more you're able to kind of engage that pattern recognition genius that is in all of us. Did you know about pattern recognition, just while we're on that subject? Do you know that when they print stamps, that they use humans to check for anomalies in the prints? Well, I know they certainly did when my dad was in the post office. Bear in mind, this was 30 years ago, but even then there was technology that existed to check for anomalies. That's because when you're scanning through, the human eye is able to like see the anomalies better than computers. Matt, you're nodding there. We are pattern recognition machines.
There's a reason that the spot the difference exercise persists across time, because we are machines made to build patterns. Sometimes those patterns are for ill, but we make them.
Jeremy Lentz described that very well in his book, The Patterning Instinct, which essentially is the human condition.
But I would very much like to go back to a point that you said, Pete, about not overcomplicating it and tie it directly to this need for a human eye to make sure that you got that pattern recognition. There are people who get way too involved with the technology at the very beginning to try and build the entire process and filter people out before they even get to the call, but without doing that groundwork we mentioned at the very start about having your time wasted a little bit, spending it with people to get that feedback. One day we'll get to a story I think I mentioned a little while ago about a podcast interview that I went on for someone where I had zero interaction with the person who was hosting the podcast until I got on the call to record. And I even asked, hey, can I chat with you about a few things before it? And she was like, and I didn't even get a response back. It was a form funnel to a series of emails and then turning up to a Zoom call and then nothing afterwards either for like 8 months. And that might be someone who's done the one-to-ones already and figured out what they want. I mean, podcasting is different to the one-to-ones in that it should be a very close, like, relationship that brings people to the table to reveal this stuff. But I think people shouldn't go hunting for, filtering apps or lead creation form funnels to try and filter out people through complex flow charts at the beginning. Like what you do, Pete, is really good. The way that you have that human analysis and reflection on the people you're talking to, which is necessary for what you do, but immensely valuable to just, deploy that pattern recognition you mentioned to be able to figure out.
Yeah, and we were kind of merging in podcasts as well as sales calls. As far as a podcast is concerned, initially I just spoke to anybody. I kind of had broadly entrepreneurs and artists, but I just spoke to anyone. But now I'm really, really clear about who I speak to. And on the sales call side, yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Rob, in terms of if you find yourself if the majority of your bottom of funnel conversations with people, you're not recognizing enough people as those kind of people that I described as, yes, I'm almost certain that they'll become a client. Then
if they jump on the call and ask, so what is this? Or so what do you do? I'm like, Okay. Something's gone wrong.
Yeah.
What's the best way of following up with people? Is it a case of just adding people to your database and ongoing comms, or do you send a specific follow-up afterwards, maybe a text or?
It's a good question. Stuart has done a phenomenal job of building a long-term nurture sequence. So his process is somebody has a discovery call with me. I'm that first filtration, second filtration after the marketing that's got them to a call with me. Although there's not as much of the, there's still, to my mind, there's still too many, I don't know, that unqualified. What's the word? Unqualified, not suitable.
Yeah.
What's the word? Okay. Let me put a question to you. If someone was to fully engage with our hypothesis and do all of the things we've been talking about, or the help before you sell and stuff, and they are only having those sales calls with people that have kind of navigated their way down, what sort of hit rate or close rate, conversion rate would you expect on those calls?
In terms of getting to the truth and not the sale, pretty high. I want to be getting to the truth most of the time.
Quicker than any other method. Okay. Yeah. So, and that's not happening at the moment. So maybe there is stuff to address elsewhere in Stuart's thing. But I say, to his credit, he's built a phenomenal long-term nurture sequence, high value long-term nurture, 1 email a week for a year, with all the different. He wrote a 250-page book on the fundamentals of funding for pre-seed startups. So there's just like bits of information from that every week for a year. So I was also talking about the process. So I'm the first filtration. Anyone that I think has got potential that wouldn't be wasting Stuart's time for that founder to present to Stuart, they go through to a second call, which is me and Stuart, where they get an opportunity to present their business, and then Stuart interrogates them, or asks them fairly pointed questions about their startup, and then they have an opportunity to join the program there and then.
I think maybe don't expect too much from any individual conversation as well. Perhaps it is worth taking a long-term view. So, for instance, I've referenced Jason Leister a few times on this podcast as someone whose work I like and follow. Jason is coming on the Not Straight Line podcast in a few weeks.
And that episode will 100% be fast tracked up the publishing schedule. There's no doubt about it. I've already got a hole in it ready. He's taken your place, Rob, again.
Yeah, my episode's not coming out for years, don't worry.
Yeah.
But I actually had a one-to-one call with Jason. I think it was when I was in my previous house. So this is going back best part of 8 years, I reckon. And he put out an email to his list and said, I'm doing a series of 3 15-minute calls. Well, we'll talk about anything. I'll take a look at your website. I'll give you some pointers. And he took a look. I think that was back in the RJD consulting days, where he looked at my website and was like, yeah, this is way too much like tools on the table. Like, what's your mission? What's your purpose? So I even like kind of remember the gist of the conversation. But that was about 8 years ago. But I'm still in his world. I'm still in the long-term nurture process. And it's just, if nothing else, it's another touch point along the same journey. And someone is going to put you in a category of one. They're much more likely to put you in a category of one when you've actually spoken to them.
I'm really pleased that we've come back to the long-term view, which is like, you cannot engage with this hypothesis of helping before you sell with a short-term mentality. It is long-term, it is slow, it is organic. But if you do the work, watch this space as we practice what we preach. This is the kind of test case, if you like, then the results will speak for themselves.
It's the slow cooker approach to marketing rather than the flash in the pan.
I've been getting into the slow cooker recently. Oh boy. Like something great.
It's a sign of age, but also perhaps a sign of wisdom.
I think so.
I think, yeah, just one more thing. And I think it's just echoing what you said earlier, Rob, about limiting your one-to-one availability. Is, I would say there is value from having a bit of space in your calendar, if not every week, then certainly every month, to do what Jason did. I mean, I don't know if he still does that now, because if you're not regularly getting a temperature gauge and feel for your audience and their problems and pains, then you are in danger of getting caught up in a bubble which contains data from not the present. And I think just regularly, they say in the startup world, you've got one job as a founder is talk to customers, talk to potential customers. And I think we can learn from that and just have regular time where we say, look, if you want to book a call with me, there are 3 spots a month, and provide as much value as I can in the 15 or 20 minutes. And yeah, you'd be surprised what might come out of that.
It's a preemptive antidote to eating your own bullshit.
Yeah, great analogy. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Help Before You Sell, sponsored by Activate Your Podcast. To activate your podcast and help the people who most need you and your services, head to activateyourpodcast.com/help. If you found this episode helpful, please also leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And remember, help more to sell more. See you next time.